So let me take you back to the craziest and most terrifying experience of my life. This all happened a couple of years ago, but I still get chills thinking about it. I've always been one of those guys who's super into exploring the weird parts of the internet. You know, not the regular YouTube or social media stuff, but the dark web. I'd read all these stories online about creepy encounters, and I guess I got curious. Stupidly curious. So I found myself delving deeper into the dark web. At first, it was all just mundane stuff, boring forums and some shady marketplaces. Nothing too crazy. But then, I stumbled upon a thread that piqued my interest. It was a chat room of sorts where people were sharing all sorts of creepy experiences. Most of it seemed like made-up nonsense, but there was this one guy who went by the username Obsidian Darkness. His stories felt real. They weren't just horror fiction, they had a gritty, unsettling edge to them. I don't know what got into me, but I decided to message him. I just wanted to know if he was for real or just another internet troll. We exchanged messages and I quickly realized he was definitely something else. The guy talked about things that were just off. His knowledge of certain dark web dealings was too specific, too detailed. It was like he knew exactly how to push the boundaries of what was just storytelling and what was reality. After a few days of back and forth, Obsidian Darkness suggested we meet up. He said he had something to show me, something that would blow my mind. Now, looking back, I realize how stupid I was. I mean, who meets a random stranger from the dark web? But I was hooked. I was curious and, frankly, a bit arrogant, thinking I could handle whatever he threw at me. We decided to meet at an old, rundown park on the outskirts of town, way past midnight. The place was notorious for being sketchy even in daylight, let alone at night. As I made my way there, every logical part of my brain was screaming at me to turn back. But I ignored it. When I got there, the park was completely deserted. The swings were creaking in the wind, and there was this eerie silence that wrapped around the entire place. I waited for about 10 minutes before a tall, shadowy figure emerged from the trees. He was wearing a long black coat and a baseball cap that obscured most of his face. He approached me with this unnerving confidence, like he owned the night itself. "Obsidian Darkness?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Yeah," he replied in a low, gravelly voice that sent shivers down my spine. He stood just a bit too close for comfort, his eyes obscured in the darkness under his cap. I tried to play it cool, but there was something inherently wrong about him. He radiated this aura of danger that I couldn't shake, but instead of trusting my gut and leaving, I stayed. He began talking about the dark web, about how it was just a facade for something deeper, something darker. His words were cryptic, filled with sinister implications that made my skin crawl. And then, without warning, he pulled out a knife. It wasn't like the kind you'd see in movies. This thing was brutal, jagged, with a handle wrapped in some kind of black cloth. I froze. My brain couldn't process what was happening. One moment he was just talking, and the next he was brandishing a weapon. "Don't scream," he hissed, his voice dripping with menace. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My voice was lodged in my throat. Everything felt surreal, like I was trapped in a nightmare. Before I could react, he lunged at me. The blade sank into my side, and a searing pain shot through my body. It was so intense, I thought I might pass out. He pulled the knife out, and I stumbled back, clutching my side, feeling the warm blood seep through my fingers. I remember falling to the ground, the world spinning around me. Obsidian Darkness stood over me, the knife glinting ominously in the dim light. I thought that was it. I thought I was going to die right there, in that forgotten park. But instead of finishing me off, he leaned down close, so close I could feel his breath on my face. "This is just the beginning," he whispered, his voice barely audible. And with that, he disappeared into the night, leaving me bleeding and terrified. I managed to drag myself to the nearest street, where a passing car finally stopped and called for help. I was rushed to the hospital, slipping in and out of consciousness. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive, but all I could think about was how this stranger from the dark web had nearly killed me, and how he said it wasn't over. That night changed everything for me. I knew I had to find out who Obsidian Darkness really was, and why he targeted me. The police were involved, but they didn't have much to go on. The dark web was a labyrinth of anonymity, and they didn't seem hopeful about finding him. But I wasn't about to let this go. I became obsessed with finding out more about him, retracing my steps on the dark web, searching for any clue that could lead me to him. The fear of another encounter loomed over me, but so did the need for answers. Little did I know, this was just the start of a terrifying journey that would consume my life in ways I never imagined. And that's just part one. There's so much more to tell, but I'll get into that later. Let me know if you want to hear the rest. After the attack, everything changed for me. I couldn't just go back to my regular life. The incident was all over the local news, but I kept the details vague, hoping to avoid further unwanted attention. But in reality, I was a mess. I barely slept, haunted by nightmares of obsidian darkness finding me again and finishing the job. Every shadow seemed like him, lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The hospital released me after a week of recovery, though the doctors warned me that I needed time to heal both physically and mentally. My family was understandably shaken. My mom kept asking what happened, why I was at the park so late. I lied, saying I just got mugged, not wanting to drag them into the dark web mess. The police, while sympathetic, didn't offer much hope. I could tell they were overwhelmed, and a lone lunatic with a knife wasn't exactly high on their priority list, especially without any solid leads. Despite my fear, I couldn't shake the need for answers. I needed to know why this happened to me, and if it could happen again. I had to find obsidian darkness. My rational side told me to let it go, but curiosity and anger kept me from listening. So, once I was back home, I set up my computer and logged back into the dark web, retracing my steps to the same forum where I first encountered him. The forum was still there, buzzing with the same eerie energy. Threads were filled with ghost stories, urban legends, and random dark web experiences. Obsidian Darkness hadn't posted since our encounter, which made me even more paranoid. But then I noticed something weird. A new user named Midnight_Oracle started posting about me. Well, not about me exactly, but about the incident. It was vague, but the details lined up a bit too closely with what happened in the park. The posts implied that Obsidian Darkness was a part of something bigger, a network or cult of sorts. I messaged Midnight_Oracle, trying to pry more information out of him. It took a few days, but eventually he responded. The conversation was cryptic, full of riddles and half-truths. He claimed Obsidian Darkness was part of a group called the Shadow Brotherhood. It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a cheesy horror movie, but there was an unsettling conviction in Midnight Oracle's words. According to him, the Brotherhood was more than just an internet rumor. They were real, and they thrived on fear. He warned me not to dig too deep, saying they had eyes everywhere. When I asked why I was targeted, he simply replied, "You were chosen." Chosen? That word sent a shiver down my spine. Chosen for what? I demanded more answers, but he went radio silent after that. My mind raced with possibilities. What had I stumbled into? Was this some twisted game, or was there something more sinister at play? Determined to uncover the truth, I spent countless nights diving deeper into the dark web, looking for any mention of this shadow brotherhood. I found rumors of rituals, strange gatherings, and disappearances tied to the group. Most of it seemed like conspiracy theories, but there was one story that caught my attention. A first-hand account of a man who claimed he escaped one of their gatherings. His post described a terrifying initiation ritual held in a remote location. Hooded figures surrounded him, chanting in a language he couldn't understand. The atmosphere was thick with menace, and he barely escaped with his life after refusing to participate. The description of the figures matched what Midnight_Oracle had told me. Shadowy, almost spectral in appearance, like they thrived in darkness. My heart pounded as I read on, and the more I learned, the more paranoid I became. I started seeing connections everywhere. Internet forums, missing persons reports, even local news stories. I knew I was spiraling, but I couldn't stop. I was terrified that Obsidian Darkness wasn't just a random psycho, but a member of this brotherhood, someone sent to recruit or silence me. Days turned into weeks, and I barely left my apartment. My friends noticed my absence. My mom kept calling, but I ignored most of them. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of sanity, caught between reality and this dark web nightmare. The paranoia was suffocating, and I jumped at every sound, convinced that Obsidian Darkness was lurking around every corner. Then one night, while I was deep in my investigation, I received an anonymous message. The text was simple, yet chilling. "We're watching you." My heart stopped, and my stomach churned with dread. I stared at the screen, rereading the message over and over. Was this a prank, A bluff? Or was the Brotherhood really onto me? The reality of my situation finally hit me. I had no idea who was behind the message or what they were capable of. I was playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before I got burned again. I knew I had to make a decision: keep digging and risk another attack, or back off and try to reclaim some semblance of a normal life. Despite the fear, a part of me refused to give up. I couldn't just walk away, not without knowing what I was up against. But I also knew I needed help. I couldn't do this alone. I reached out to a friend from college, Jamie, who was tech-savvy and level-headed. Everything I wasn't at that moment. I met Jamie at a quiet cafe, spilling everything about the dark web, obsidian darkness, and the Shadow Brotherhood. At first, he was skeptical, thinking I was caught up in some elaborate prank or hoax. But as I laid out everything I'd discovered, he started to take it seriously. "We'll figure this out," Jamie promised, his tone a mix of determination and concern. "But you need to be careful. Whoever these people are, they don't sound like they're messing around." For the first time since the attack, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this nightmare. But even as we plotted our next move, a gnawing fear remained. The message was clear. The Brotherhood knew I was onto them. And if I wasn't careful, my curiosity might lead me straight into their trap. With Jamie on board, things started to feel a little more manageable. We spent hours poring over the information I'd gathered, trying to make sense of it all. He set up encryption for my messages and added extra layers of security to my computer, emphasizing the need to stay as anonymous as possible. I felt a little safer with him involved, but the fear lingered like a shadow, refusing to let me go. We decided the best course of action was to try and track down any digital footprint Obsidian Darkness might have left. Jamie was a wizard with this stuff, far more adept at navigating the murky waters of the dark web than I ever was. We scoured forums and chat rooms, looking for any hint of his presence. A couple of days into our investigation, we stumbled upon a video link in one of the forums, posted by a user with a username similar to Obsidian Darkness. The video was titled "The Chosen Ones." My heart raced as I clicked the link, unsure of what to expect. The screen flickered to life, revealing grainy footage of a dimly lit room. The camera panned over a group of hooded figures standing in a circle, their faces obscured by darkness. In the center was a young man tied to a chair, blindfolded and visibly shaking. My stomach churned with nausea as I realized I was witnessing an initiation ritual. The figures chanted in low, rhythmic voices, the sound distorted and unsettling. The man in the chair was pleading, his voice barely audible over the chanting. One of the figures stepped forward, holding a knife that glinted menacingly in the flickering candlelight. I watched, horrified, as the figure raised the knife and cut a shallow line across the man's arm. It was a twisted mockery of a blood oath, sealing his fate as part of whatever cult this was. The video ended abruptly, leaving me shaken and full of questions. Was this real or just a sick joke? The footage felt authentic, too raw to be staged. I could hardly breathe, my mind racing with the implications. If this was the Brotherhood, they were more dangerous than I ever imagined. Jamie was pale, his expression mirroring my own shock and disgust. "We need to report this," he said, his voice laced with urgency. "The cops need to know." I hesitated. "And tell them what? That we found a creepy video on the dark web? They'll just brush it off as a hoax." He nodded, understanding my reluctance, but not happy about it. "Okay, but we need to be smart about this. If the Brotherhood is real, we have to tread carefully. We can't risk drawing their attention again." Our plan was to gather as much information as possible, and then decide on a course of action. I spent the next few days in a constant state of anxiety, jumping at every sound, convinced that Obsidian Darkness or one of his cult buddies would show up at my door. But nothing happened. The days stretched into a tense silence, each one feeling like the calm before the storm. One night, Jamie called me, his voice tense with excitement. "I think I found something," he said. "I was digging through some old threads and found a user who claims to have met Obsidian Darkness. He's posted a series of stories about interactions with him. I was intrigued but wary." "What does he say?" "He describes him as a recruiter, someone who finds potential new members for the Brotherhood. But get this, he says that once you're targeted, they don't stop until you're either one of them or what?" I asked, my throat tightening with fear. "Or you disappear," Jamie finished, his voice heavy with implication. The reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I was a target, a loose end that needed tying up. And if this user was right, the Brotherhood wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted, or until I was no longer a threat. We decided to contact the user, hoping he might have more information, or at least some advice on how to stay safe. It took a few days, but he eventually replied. His messages were cautious, almost paranoid. He told us he'd escaped the Brotherhood's grasp by going completely off the grid. New identity, new location, the works. You can't run forever, he warned, but if you're smart, you can buy yourself some time. I considered his words, the weight of them sinking in. I didn't want to run, to abandon my life and hide like a fugitive. But the alternative, joining the Brotherhood or disappearing, was unthinkable. Jamie and I spent hours discussing our options, trying to devise a plan that wouldn't end with me in a coffin or a cult. It was then that Jamie suggested we try to infiltrate the Brotherhood, find a way to expose them from the inside. It's risky, he admitted, but it might be our best shot. If we can gather enough evidence, we can take it to the authorities and force them to act. I knew it was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but the thought of living the rest of my life in fear was worse. I agreed, my determination fueled by anger and a desire for justice. We decided to create a fake identity for me, someone who would be appealing to the Brotherhood's twisted ideals. For weeks, we worked on building this new persona, dropping hints and breadcrumbs in various dark web forums, hoping to catch the attention of Obsidian Darkness or his allies. It was a nerve-wracking process, but it paid off. One night, I received a message from a user named Raven Watcher, inviting me to a gathering at a remote location outside the city. The message was cryptic, filled with ominous undertones, but it was the breakthrough we'd been waiting for. Jamie and I spent hours analyzing it, planning every possible scenario and preparing for what lay ahead. We knew it was a trap, but it was a risk we had to take. As the day of the gathering approached, my fear and anxiety reached new heights. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into my own doom, but the thought of finally getting answers, of uncovering the truth behind the Brotherhood, kept me going. The day finally arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves, barely able to function. Jamie was my lifeline, keeping me grounded and focused. We had a plan, but I knew things could go wrong in an instant. The Brotherhood was a real, insidious threat, and I was stepping into their lair willingly. The meeting was set for midnight, in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was the perfect setting for something dark and sinister, the kind of place where screams went unheard. As I made my way there, every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I pushed on, driven by the need to end this once and for all. The warehouse loomed in the distance, an imposing structure silhouetted against the night sky. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. This was it, the moment of truth. I could feel the Brotherhood's presence, like an unseen force pulling me in. With one last glance back at the empty road, I stepped inside, ready to face whatever horrors awaited me in the shadows. The inside of the warehouse was everything you'd expect from a place that held dark secrets. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from flickering candles placed strategically around the room. Their dim glow cast eerie shadows that seemed to dance across the walls, giving life to the darkness that surrounded me. My heart pounded in my chest as I took in the scene. The center of the room was dominated by a large circular emblem etched into the concrete floor. It was an intricate design that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Around it stood a group of hooded figures, their faces obscured by the shadows. I felt like I was in a scene straight out of a horror movie, and the reality of it made my skin crawl. I was standing on the edge of something sinister, something that felt alive and hungry. For a brief moment, I considered turning around and running, but the resolve to see this through kept me rooted in place. One of the figures stepped forward, the flickering light revealing glimpses of his face beneath the hood. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized him. It was Obsidian Darkness. The same chilling presence I had felt in the park radiated from him now, a tangible aura of menace. "We've been expecting you," he said, his voice low and almost welcoming, as if this was a casual meeting among friends. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. "I'm here to understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What is the Brotherhood, and why me?" Obsidian Darkness chuckled softly, a sound that was more threatening than amused. You were chosen because you're curious, because you're willing to see what others turn away from. The Brotherhood seeks those who aren't afraid to confront the darkness. His words twisted in my mind, a mix of flattery and threat. I knew I had to play along, at least until I understood their game. "So, what happens now?" I asked, trying to sound eager rather than terrified. He gestured for me to join the circle. The other members parted to make space for me, and I moved forward with a mix of trepidation and determination. I could feel their eyes on me, evaluating, judging. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to stay calm, reminding myself of the plan. As I took my place within the circle, Obsidian Darkness began to speak, his voice carrying an authority that demanded attention. The Brotherhood is about transcending the mundane, embracing the shadows that others fear. We seek knowledge and power that lies beyond the veil of ordinary perception. His words were intoxicating, a siren song that pulled at the corners of my mind. I had to remind myself that this was all an act, that I was here to gather information and expose them. But a small part of me was curious, drawn to the idea of uncovering hidden truths. The ritual began, a series of chants and gestures that seemed to follow a precise, ancient pattern. The energy in the room shifted, becoming palpable and electric. I could feel it coursing through my veins, filling me with a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. As the ritual reached its peak, Obsidian Darkness produced a small, ornate dagger. Its blade gleamed in the candlelight, and I realized with a sickening lurch that this was the same knife he had used on me in the park. He approached me, and the other members closed in, their presence forming a barrier between me and escape. "Do you accept the shadows?" he asked, holding the dagger out to me. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. My mind raced, weighing my options. I knew I had to play along, at least for now. Taking the dagger in my hands, I nodded, hoping my fear wasn't too obvious. The Brotherhood seemed satisfied, their attention turning to the next stage of the ritual. But as they continued, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Jamie, peering through a gap in the wall, his eyes wide with urgency. My heart skipped a beat, torn between relief and terror. I had to act fast. I knew this was my chance to escape, but I couldn't blow my cover. I carefully signaled to Jamie, trying to communicate without drawing attention from the others. He seemed to understand, his eyes locking onto mine with a silent promise of help. I waited for the right moment, my mind working frantically to come up with a plan. The Brotherhood was focused on their ritual, their attention diverted, and I knew I had to make my move. With a deep breath, I tightened my grip on the dagger and lunged toward Obsidian Darkness, the element of surprise on my side. The dagger pierced his arm, and he let out a guttural scream, the sound reverberating through the warehouse. Chaos erupted as the other members scrambled to react. I used the distraction to break free, rushing toward the exit where Jamie was waiting. He yanked the door open and we bolted into the night, adrenaline propelling us forward. As we ran, I could hear shouts behind us, the Brotherhood in pursuit. The darkness of the night seemed to close in around us, but fear and desperation fueled my legs, pushing me to run faster than I ever thought possible. Jamie led us through a series of alleyways, taking twists and turns to throw off our pursuers. My lungs burned with exertion, but I didn't dare slow down. I knew that if they caught us, we wouldn't get another chance. Finally, we reached Jamie's car, parked in a secluded spot behind an old factory. We jumped in, and he peeled out of there, tires screeching as we sped away. My heart was pounding, and my hands shook with residual adrenaline. But we were safe. For now. As the city lights blurred past, I glanced at Jamie, his face etched with concern. "What the hell was that?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and anger. I took a shaky breath, trying to piece together everything that had just happened. "The Brotherhood? They're real, Jamie, and they won't stop until they get what they want." We drove for what felt like hours, putting as much distance between us and the warehouse as possible. My mind was a whirl of thoughts, the reality of our situation sinking in. We had barely escaped with our lives, and I knew the Brotherhood wouldn't take this lightly. Once we were far enough away, we stopped at a roadside diner, needing a place to regroup and figure out our next steps. As we sat in a dimly lit booth, the events of the night replayed in my mind, a chilling reminder of how close I had come to becoming one of them. Or worse. Jamie looked at me, his expression serious. "We need to end this," he said. We have to find a way to stop them for good. I nodded, my resolve hardening. I was tired of running, tired of living in fear. The Brotherhood might have started this game, but I was determined to finish it. With Jamie by my side, I knew we could find a way to bring them down. But deep down, I also knew that our fight was just beginning, and the Brotherhood would stop at nothing to silence us. We were up against something dark and powerful, and I could only hope that we'd be strong enough to face whatever came next. We spent the next few days laying low at a motel off the beaten path, trying to stay off the Brotherhood's radar while we figured out our next move. The room was cramped and smelled faintly of mildew, but it was a safe haven, a place where we could regroup and gather our thoughts. I had barely slept since the encounter at the warehouse, my mind replaying the events over and over, the threat of the Brotherhood looming large. Jamie was a rock, though. He kept me grounded, constantly brainstorming ways to strike back at the Brotherhood. We knew we needed to gather evidence, something solid that would force the authorities to take notice. Without it, we'd be stuck in this nightmare, hunted by shadows we couldn't see. Our plan was to return to the digital world, to the same dark web forums where this all started. We'd spent years chasing shadows. Now, we needed to pull those shadows into the light. Jamie worked tirelessly, scouring through forums, chat rooms, and encrypted message boards, trying to track down any leads on the Brotherhood's operations. The pressure was mounting, every keystroke feeling like a countdown to our next encounter with them. Then, one night, we got a breakthrough. Jamie managed to trace an IP address linked to Obsidian Darkness, leading us to a small town about an hour away from where we were hiding. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead we had. We knew the risks, but we had no choice. This might be our only opportunity to uncover something that could help us end this nightmare. We packed up our things, checking out of the motel under the cover of darkness, and made our way to the town. It was a quiet, unassuming place, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone else. It seemed impossible that something so sinister could be hiding here, but we had learned not to trust appearances. The address led us to an old, decrepit house at the edge of town, surrounded by overgrown trees that cast long, ominous shadows. The windows were boarded up, and the place looked like it had been abandoned for years. But something about it felt wrong, like a presence lingered within, watching us. We parked a little way down the street, careful not to draw attention, and approached the house cautiously. As we got closer, I felt a strange unease settle over me, a feeling that we were not alone. Jamie and I exchanged a glance, steeling ourselves for what we might find inside. The door creaked open with an unsettling groan, revealing a dark, musty interior. The air was thick with dust, and every step we took echoed through the empty rooms. The place was eerily silent, but there was something in the air, a tension, a sense that something was waiting for us. We moved through the house, searching for any sign of activity, any clue that might lead us to the Brotherhood. It wasn't long before we found a trapdoor hidden beneath a ratty old rug in the living room. My heart pounded in my chest as we lifted it, revealing a set of stairs leading down into darkness. With a shared nod of determination, we descended the stairs, our phones providing a dim, flickering light. The basement was cold and damp, the walls lined with shelves filled with strange objects. Ritualistic symbols, old books, and jars containing God knows what. It was a shrine to the macabre, a physical embodiment of the Brotherhood's twisted beliefs. In the center of the room was a table covered in papers and a laptop, the screen flickering with lines of code. Jamie moved quickly, his tech skills coming into play as he hacked into the computer, searching for any files or communications that could link the Brotherhood to criminal activity. I kept watch, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The air felt oppressive, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl, but I refused to back down, my resolve fueled by the need to put an end to this nightmare once and for all. Finally, Jamie found something, a series of emails and chat logs detailing the Brotherhood's operations. The files were extensive, outlining everything from recruitment tactics to records of their twisted rituals. There were even names and locations of other members, evidence that could bring them down. "This is it," Jamie said, his voice a mix of triumph and urgency. "We have what we need." But before we could celebrate, a noise from upstairs froze us in place. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, creaked across the floor above us. The Brotherhood had found us. My heart raced with fear, every instinct screaming for us to run. We scrambled to gather the files, Jamie transferring everything onto a flash drive as quickly as he could. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs, and I knew we had to move. There was a small window near the ceiling, barely large enough to fit through, but it was our only escape. I helped Jamie climb up, pushing him through the window before following him into the night. We hit the ground running, sprinting away from the house, the Brotherhood hot on our heels. The adrenaline coursed through my veins, fear driving me forward. As we reached the car, I glanced back, catching a glimpse of obsidian darkness standing in the doorway, his eyes burning with a malevolent intensity. I knew this wasn't over, but for now, we had the upper hand. We drove through the night, putting as much distance between us and the Brotherhood as possible. Jamie clutched the flash drive like a lifeline, our ticket to freedom. We knew we couldn't rest until we got this evidence to the authorities, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The following days were a blur of meetings with law enforcement, handing over the evidence and explaining our story. It took time, but eventually the authorities took notice. The Brotherhood's operations were exposed, their members arrested, and their twisted cult dismantled. I knew we'd have to remain vigilant, that the Brotherhood's reach might extend beyond what we uncovered. But the nightmare was finally over. I could finally breathe again, free from the constant fear that had haunted me for so long. Jamie and I vowed to stay in touch, our friendship forged in the crucible of danger. As I returned to my life, I couldn't help but feel changed. The experience had left its mark, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows of the world. But I also felt stronger, more aware of the strength I possessed to face the unknown. The Brotherhood had tried to consume me, to drag me into their world, but I had fought back, and won. I knew I could face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the knowledge that I had survived the darkest of nights. In the end, the Brotherhood's attempt to make me one of their own had failed. Their darkness had been no match for the light of truth, and though their shadows lingered, I refused to let them define me. The ordeal was behind me, and as I looked toward the future, I knew that I was finally free.